So I'd like to welcome Mrs. Monica Naber and Mrs. Susan Bauld to the stage, please. Monica Naber is a registered psychologist, and she has worked in the field of autism for the past 10 years, including at the Autism Research Center, where she's involved in the Social ABCs project that Dr. Zweigenbaum described, as well as working clinically in the autism clinic at the Glenrose. And this is Monica with the glasses. Susan Bauld has been a registered child psychologist since 2000. And she has a special interest in autism, specifically early intervention and supporting families with young children with autism. She has enjoyed working with the team at the Autism Research Center during the past 9 years, and most recently she has started her private practice in the community where she consults with preschool programs and seeing children for assessments and treatments. Join me in welcoming them for their presentation.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming out. So when our group started thinking about topics that we wanted to include for today, I just reflected on what are some of those common questions that I typically get asked. And I find the question of how do I manage repetitive behavior be one of those frequently asked questions. So we hope the presentation this morning gives you some practical tips on how to manage repetitive behavior. So I know probably most of you are already quite versed in what it is, but I just wanted to really briefly describe what repetitive behavior is. So in general, it's this extreme preference for a particular activity, toy, or object, but it can come in a variety of forms. So it can show up as repetitive movements with objects. So that's something like lining up toys or repeatedly playing with a toy in the same way over and over. Repeated body movements such as pacing or hand flapping. And we also have ritualistic behavior, sensory sensitivities or sensory seeking. And it can also show up in circumscribed interest, which is really just an intense or heightened focused interest. So repetitive behavior is a core symptom of ASD, but there's multiple reasons as to why a child might engage in repetitive behavior. It can occur as a way for a child to maintain an ideal level of stimulation. So that's either increasing or decreasing their stimulation depending on the environmental level, and therefore helping them to regulate their arousal level. It can also occur as a way for the child to manage their anxiety or their stress. And these behaviors can also be rewarding or enjoyable, especially if they're satisfying a sensory seeking aspect. Now, we can all engage in repetitive behavior from time to time. For example, if we're feeling nervous, you might be repeatedly playing with your pen or tapping your foot on the floor. So in those kind of limited formats, repetitive behavior can actually be quite adaptive. They help us reduce our anxiety, their way we organize and adjust to our environment. The problem occurs when these behaviors become more adaptive in children. And that can occur when they become these long-term habits and interfere or take away with their ability to develop other self-help skills, social skills, play skills. So as such, we really wanted to emphasize here that not all repetitive behavior needs to be stopped or redirected. Rather, we hope it gives you some ideas on how to successfully manage repetitive behavior when you're finding they're starting to become maladaptive. So how do we do that? Well, first we need to look at and determine what the purpose of the behavior is. So it does serve a useful purpose. So you need to determine what that is so that we can then identify appropriate alternative behavior to help teach our child. For example, if a child is engaging in repetitive body movement, they might be doing that to help them stay regulated. So if we just try to take that away or stop it, then they can't regulate their arousal level anymore. And either another repetitive behavior might pop up, or you might actually have an increase in disruptive behavior because they're not regulated anymore. So again, we need to try to teach an appropriate alternative behavior. Another way of looking at this is, what is your goal? You could think about as, when I'm playing with my child, I want her to play with me versus repeatedly playing with a toy. Or if there's a change in my child's routine, I'd like for them to handle it effectively rather than having an increase in ritualistic behavior. So it may not be necessary to reduce the repetitive behavior directly, rather help them learn an alternative, more appropriate behavior. Additionally, it could also be helpful to really tell other people in your child's environment that they need to engage in these repetitive behaviors because it does serve a useful purpose to them. So next we're going to go into some common reasons as to why a child might engage in repetitive behavior and discuss alternative strategies one could use. So I'll hand it over to Susan. She's going to talk for a little bit.
Okay, so we wanted to talk a little bit about some different strategies that we might now use to help redirect a child's behavior, or give you some ideas, maybe some things you're already using, but just emphasizing things that would be helpful in trying to manage these sorts of challenges. So we know that often children will engage in repetitive behaviors for some kind of sensory feedback. So one suggestion would be to choose toys that give your child similar sensations to the repetitive behavior that they're showing. So it used to be quite hard to find some of these materials, but now if you look in most toy stores, there's often little sections that actually have lots of toys that provide sensory feedback to children. So one example might be if a child was engaging in a lot of hand movements, redirecting that into an activity where they were building blocks and using their hands to build more constructively might be helpful. For a child who might enjoy mouth movements, bubble blowing might be a suggestion, or a child that enjoys a lot of noise, toys that have more auditory feedback might be helpful. We also know that pulling in an occupational therapist can be really valuable in these situations, where they might actually help you set up a structured routine or actually structured play that helps your child with their sensory input. And if there are structured times during the day, then it might be that the child actually shows a reduced need to engage in repetitive behaviors at other times. I think thirdly, trying to come up with creative ways to channel the behaviors can be really helpful. So if you have a child that loves to jump up and down in a repetitive fashion, channeling that by using a small trampoline might be one way to do that, or a child that enjoys rocking, using a swing in a play-based manner might also be helpful. So a concern for many families that we hear about is sometimes the repetitive behavior can become so rewarding that it might actually prevent the child from doing other types of activities. So it might be difficult to move on to more functional play, and it might prevent them from playing with other children or from playing with you. So the challenge then becomes, if the child is stuck, how do we help them move on to other behaviors? So we have a few suggestions. Sometimes it might seem counterintuitive, but actually joining your child in the repetitive play can be a good way or a good first step of making that connection. So we'll use the example of a child spinning the wheels of a car over and over again. So the first step might be to get down to their level and show an interest in what the child is doing. So join them in the play. You could spin the wheels with them while making fun sounds and smiling, trying to be engaging and interactive. Really getting down to your child's level, showing positive emotion, and trying to get into that sort of meaningful face-to-face type of interaction can be really helpful. The next thing that we might suggest trying is slowly show them a new way to play with the toy. So for the car, it might be then running the car down a ramp rather than spinning the wheels repetitively. So you might only get one quick turn to do that, and then you might have to go back to allowing them to play in the way that they prefer, which in this case might be spinning the wheels. And over time, the hope would be that you could increase that ramp play and then potentially go back and forth between spinning the wheels and using the ramp. So of course, the fourth step there is to try to be animated in your play and fun, using different sounds, trying to be silly to increase your child's motivation to interact and play with you. We were going to demonstrate that, but we'll leave it to your imagination. So again, sometimes there are situations when we do really need to help our children move on and redirect them to other types of play. So that can be challenging. I'm sure many of you have experienced that. It might be that we actually do need to remove the toy that the child is stuck on. And of course, as parents, you sort of know when you're going to choose that, pick that battle, and when maybe it's better just to give the child time to actually have the toy. If the child is potentially stuck, sometimes we can try other things like giving a clear warning, one more turn or one more minute. Using a countdown timer can sometimes be helpful for children if they see that visual that the time is about to finish. And then making a trade can sometimes be helpful too, where we actually try to substitute another more interesting or fun toy to help move them away from the thing that they might be stuck on. So a few more thoughts here, just about some other strategies that might be helpful. We know that many children do engage in repetitive behavior to try to regulate their behavior. So in times when they're experienced increased levels of stress, that might be a time where you do tend to see more of these repetitive behaviors. So some suggestions that we have, obviously minimizing your child's stress may help reduce that need to engage in repetitive behaviors. So keeping a predictable environment or a predictable routine as much as possible can help reduce stress. Keeping track of things that may tend to overstimulate your child or maybe cause less arousal can be a good strategy as well. So all children will differ in the sort of the right amount that they need. And when you notice these repetitive behaviors, really sort of taking stock of the environment in terms of what might be contributing to that. So it might be the environment's too noisy or lights are too bright, those kinds of things. Having a toolkit available is a really great idea. I think it's something that lots of parents have on hand, or they start to develop ideas about what's helpful for their child. So it might be headphones in a noisy environment, or a hat if there's going to be bright light. If your child needs more oral stimulation, a cup with a straw, or something to stimulate oral movements, those kinds of things. And then I think lastly, which is really, really important, is recognizing that some children do just need that time in their day to have an opportunity to engage in their preferred behavior or repetitive behavior, recognizing that sometimes they're just in sensory overload and really need that downtime. So that might be after school at the end of the day, or after being in a busy environment, or after an extracurricular activity. So actually having set times scheduled in your day where you allow time for these behaviors, I think can also be really effective.
All right, just a couple more here that we have. So if a child struggles with anxiety, that can also be a main reason as to why they might be engaging in repetitive behavior. Now, this is quite a big topic. Some of these strategies can be quite multi-layered. So if you're thinking that anxiety is one of those kind of core issues as to causing the repetitive behavior, it could be really helpful to seek out additional health professional support when working on some of these strategies. So some strategies include just the art of distraction. So if you're noticing the child having an increased anxiety and there's an increase in repetitive behavior, bringing out maybe their favorite toy or their favorite activity to keep them busy and to distract them. Or if they're starting to hum, playing soft music, part of that is having the toolkit available that Susan mentioned. Teaching the child deep breathing. So deep breathing is a really good tool to help reduce one's anxiety. And so if you can just manage the anxiety, then indirectly you're managing the repetitive behavior. There's some really nice concrete ways now of helping a child teach deep breathing, because I know that can be kind of difficult to teach. But things like even teaching them how to blow a bubble or blowing up a balloon. And there's actually some really, really great apps out there now too that have the visuals. It's a bit of a movie. They can really pay attention to it, and it teaches them how to do some deep breathing. There's also just helping your child prepare in advance for the outing or activity that is going to cause them anxiety or stress. And these are activities such as social stories, visual schedules, or visiting the place that causes them stress ahead of time. Some longer-term solutions can be developing a My Coping plan or teaching a child how to use coping statements. Now, coping statements are statements a child can use to engage in self-talk, to change anxious thoughts into more relaxed, balanced thinking styles. The Anxiety BC website up there is a really, really great website. They go into quite a bit of detail of how to teach a child how to use coping statements and what it means to teach to develop a coping plan. So check out the website if you think that would be helpful. Again, these are some kind of big ticket strategies, so it may require the support of other health professionals when you're using these strategies. And lastly, we have a child may be more likely to engage in repetitive behavior during certain activities that they're trying to avoid or escape from. So some strategies to help with that could be establishing a clear daily routine, so it's really the child knows what's expected of them, and lots of positive praise and attention for participating. Preparing the child in advance as to when the activity is going to begin and when it's going to end, or giving them an activity that they can look forward to after the non-preferred activity is done. Using clear and simple language that's clear, precise, and that the child is capable of following. Or teaching them how to ask for a break. So that could be something like using break cards and then gradually extending the amount of time between the child asking for a break and then being allowed to have one. So that goes over just some common reasons as to why a child might engage repetitive behavior and just some other strategies you might be able to try.
So in closing, just a reminder that repetitive behavior in order to figure out how we should best manage it, I think it's really important to look at why the behavior is happening and try to get a sense of what the underlying purpose is. And then I think the key thing is try to work together with people that know your child well. So whether it's school-based staff, or if you have access to service provider or other family members that might have ideas as well, to try to brainstorm together. And then I think lastly, other parents are often a really great source of support as well in terms of trying to problem solve around how may be best to manage some of the more challenging behaviors. Thank you for your attention, and we'll be around on the break as well. We'd love to talk to you if there's anything you'd like to chat about or suggestions that you have for us. Thank you.
Thank you.